This is Dave Monk from Prairie Monk, WEFT Champaign, 90.1 on your FM dial.
And Dave on the board today is July the 23rd, 2017. We've started the show with the music that we usually end the program with. That's Joel Mabus from his dual album called Flat Pick and Claw Hammer. We'll finish the show with the usual Doc Watson Blue Railroad Train. And this is a WEFT's weekly look at the environment, conservation, rails, trails, greenways, and what has Dave brought us this week?
Well, we have guests that we had last week, Andy Robinson and Nick Jordan, and we thought we could continue. I got a call from Susan Taylor, and she thought the program that WEF was running yesterday was quite good and interesting about climate, and we were sort of into climate a little bit on last week when we were talking about solar panels, and we're going to run a part of a program that is popular with David Wasdell, and he is a climate specialist, and he has a group called Apollo Gea, and it's a project, and from that he starts to look at the world at large. And one of the things he's recommending as a change is to use solar energy rather than energy that's stored in the ground that produces carbon dioxide. So we rustled up Andy and Nick again, and here they are, and they've arrived with a real live wanderer butterfly. And we might not be able to photograph it. Now, we can photograph it after the end of the program. But it's got a leaf to eat on. It's just come out of its chrysalis. It will have a long proboscis that will go down into a flower. So at the moment, it needs a flower. It's gone past its egg, larva, chrysalis situation.
Yes, it was a... my kids picked this up. We picked it up in the garden as an egg that was about the size of a pinhead, and that was about 24 days ago, because it was 12 days as a caterpillar, 12 days as a chrysalis, and then today it emerged as a monarch butterfly. So we're gonna let his wings dry out a little bit and release him later in the day.
So you can go through the whole process in a couple of weeks.
About a month.
About a month. Okay.
And the kids really enjoy it. So that when it's a caterpillar, it only eats milkweed leaves, so it eats about a leaf a day, and those leaves get bigger and bigger and bigger as it gets bigger. So the kids enjoy knocking out its poop and giving it fresh, clean milkweed leaves from the garden.
Yes, there's a lot that goes through and out the other end. That sort of reminds me of the Anita Purvis Center, and that center is associated with Busey Woods, and Busey Woods was a long-time acquisition with the University of Illinois, and then went to the Park District. But one of the people that was involved there was Pat Martin, and she just passed. She had a bachelor's degree in Bachelor of Arts degree, Bachelor of Science degree, and master's degree in mathematics, and taught mathematics at the U of I, and did design work after she and Roger retired. Roger was a vice chancellor at the university, and they've moved out of town to the Quantico areas where they retired to. But we remember people like Pat, who put together the Natural Area Study Group, which is now probably about 35 years old. And it's a docent group which goes to local natural areas and becomes familiar with them, and then can pass that information on to other people. So the butterfly very much goes with that. The Anita Purvis Center grew. It had a $1 million addition, and so yes, Anita Purvis was there early on, and she used to do things with with mussels in vernal ponds, and she passed away very, very early in her life. And but these are people who were associated many years ago, and they're still there. And when Natural Area Study Group has a meeting, you might have as many as 40 people there. So they're doing a very interesting job, and we applaud that. And we're sad for Pat's passing, and Roger is still around, and was always very interested in what we're doing with natural areas. So, David, let me ask, did you got ready? Okay, we're going to run a little bit of the Davids. There are 3 Davids here today. So it's David Worsdell, and he has a project of his own. He's probably a physicist, if I'm any judge, but he's looking at the environment in a broad sense. And we would like to say that he has a radio program, but he also has a video program. And his talk is fairly strong. You can listen to it and get the gist of it, but to get on to all the add-ons that he gets to, the visual program is very helpful. It's Apollo, Apollo, GIAO. It might be an A in the front. You go to let me think. Eco Shock, and there's a program there that runs regularly. It's about an hour long, and he had David on as a guest. And so what we're hoping that Andy and Nick will do to interpret some of this. It's rather important. He's wanting to point out that to have only a 2% increase in carbon dioxide is really not enough. It should be reduced to a 1% increase. And if you're going to do this over a century, there are all sorts of add-ons. If you increase a small amount of something, then it's going to change the world. I can think I grew up with trace elements, and if you took a sheep to a beach that had been well leached, and the molybdenum was not there, and the zinc was not there, and the copper was not there, all those are trace elements that could also be poisons, but if they're not there in trace, then you upset the apple cart. So what David is doing is saying that it's not just one element like global warming is one thing. It's not one computer thing. It's the computers will help. We have a Cray computer over there at the university, and it can help. We have a climate division that lets us know whether there's a tornado or there are baby tornadoes adjacent to it. There are all these sorts of things that are going on right around you, and so we would like to make this sort of global statement, but then alert you to the fact that this town has the capacity to do things about global warming.
Mm-hmm. And bringing it back to the local level, I think,
yes,
is really important.
So let's go.
Let's go.
If we warm by 5 degrees centigrade, and we may not survive 6. Many hope the climate talks in Paris can reach an agreement that will save a livable climate for all our descendants and keep global warming below 2 degrees C. But what if the national leaders are just players on a stage of illusion? What if someone told you our current levels of greenhouse gases already commit us to more than 6 degrees of global warming and over 12 meters, over 36 feet higher sea levels? And that may not be the worst of it. I'm Alex Smith with a remarkable interview from London. This is Radio EcoShock, radio you need to hear. Humans have a known tendency to either panic and hide or fight against the wrong enemy. So I try to stick to rational voices and back those up with the best scientific proof we can find. Our guest David Wasdell is one of those voices, but now he's poking big holes in mainstream hopes and illusions about saving ourselves from climate change. His latest video and paper is called Climate Dynamics, Facing the Harsh Realities of Now. David Wasdell, welcome back to Radio EcoShock.
Hello, Alex. Hey, it's always good to work with you on the critical issues that you raise, and to know that our discussion is being heard by a global audience that is both well-informed and passionately concerned. It's a pleasure talking with you.
Well, indeed they are. We've got a fantastic group of listeners, and they are well-informed. So I thought, just to let the listeners know what they're in for, why don't we start with a quick round of kind of yes or no questions?
Alex, that sounds like a great way to set the agenda, but, I can't guarantee one-word answers. Well, let's have a go.
Okay. Number 1, world leaders meet in Paris to reach an agreement to keep the world safe from dangerous climate change, even if they agree to all the voluntary goals set by each country. Will that be enough to keep climate change below 2 degrees centigrade of warming?
Absolutely not.
Right. Question 2. Do we have a comfortable margin of carbon we can burn and still avoid catastrophic climate change?
No, we've overshot that boundary by a massive amount.
Question 3. Have leading scientists modified science for politicians because the harsh realities of what we need to do are unrealistic?
Unrealistic or unacceptable. Sadly, what you're talking about is correct.
Number 4, is it true that the United Nations projections of climate change, including those from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, routinely leave out important warming forces?
That is true.
Is it conceivable, David, even possible, we are setting planet Earth on a path towards heating of 8 degrees or more centigrade, or say 16 degrees Fahrenheit hotter, in the next 100 or 200 years?
Alex, that is exactly where we are headed.
And finally, if we don't wake up and act, can this generation ruin the Earth for humanity and other species for thousands of years?
Yes.
Well, there you have it, listeners. All this is part of a stunning new video lecture and paper called Climate Dynamics, Facing the Harsh Realities of Now. The presentation is by our guest, David Wasdell. He's the director of the Apollo Gaia project. I've followed David's work for years. In December 2010, we did an interview for a Radio EcoShock show called Beyond the Tipping Point. Wasdell is well-versed in science. He keeps in touch with other scientists around the world. As an independent analyst with no institutional ties, David is free to bring out the climate science few others discuss openly with the public. Well, I've interviewed several psychologists about the human ability to lie to ourselves, but your talk goes much deeper because you're looking at vast institutional fantasies where even science is tempered by a kind of real politic. What did the famous German climate scientist John Schellenhuber tell you about that several years ago?
Hey, the idea of an available carbon budget, as we call it, was introduced just prior to the 2009 Copenhagen conference by a big think tank in Germany, the WGBU, if you translate it, the German Advisory Council on Global Change. The introduction to that report was written by Professor John Schellenhuber, who was the chair of the WBGU Council at that time. By the way, John was one of my initial colleagues at the start of the Apollo Gaia project. But in that introduction, he wrote, "This report is a compromise between what is scientifically necessary and what is politically and economically feasible." Let's do that again. This report is a compromise between what is scientifically necessary, what the situation demands, if you like, and what can be tolerated politically and economically. See, when key scientists put out reports that have already made that compromise, so that what they report to policymakers is already an appeasement document in terms of what the political and economic vested interests will tolerate, then in my opinion, they've already lost their authority as scientists.
But we do need to keep this carbon fantasy going. Otherwise, David, how will we drive to work or feed ourselves? Why do you think that now is a critical time to face the harsh realities about climate change?
Spot on. But Alex, our patterns of work, our city design, our building architecture, our transport arrangements, food production, population growth, power generation, military strategy, political, economic, and financial institutions have all developed in the context of a virtually unlimited supply of cheap fossil energy. That age is over. Not because we've run out of fossil fuel, it's far from it, but because the collateral damage from burning the vast amounts involved has changed the very composition of the air we breathe and dramatically transformed the energy balance of our planetary home. Digging ourselves out of that hole requires a transformation the likes of which we have never before been faced by our human civilization, and it's urgent.
So let's dive into your work. I found your comparison between changes in Earth temperature and our own body temperature make it easier to understand. How do they compare?
Well, Alex, the planet acts a little bit like your own body. I mean, in response to temperature. You think, if your temperature goes up by 3 or 4 degrees, you're going into life-threatening stress. 5 degrees, you're probably dead. At 3.5, I don't know, possibly going into delirium. On the other hand, if your temperature drops by about 2 or 3 degrees, you're suffering hypothermia. So you and all of us in this program have a very narrow temperature scale within which to operate. Our bodies are very sensitive to small changes in temperature, and so is the planet. Let's put it this way, just 5 degrees centigrade marks the difference between 1.5 miles of ice over Ottawa and the bustling capital city we know and love today. 5 degrees, that's all. So in that sense, global sensitivity to temperature change is extremely high. Now, from a different perspective, if you catch flu, your temperature goes up. But if you've got streptococcal meningitis, it goes up a lot further and faster. So there's a sensitivity of temperature to pathogen behavior. And there is also a sensitivity of the body to change in temperature. Two very different sorts of sensitivity. So at a planetary level, we can distinguish between the sensitivity of global climate to changes in temperature and sensitivity of global temperature to changes in carbon dioxide. Make sense?
It does. It really helps, I think, to picture this. A number of scientists, including Dr. James Hansen, have warned that...
Okay, go ahead.
So that's a start. You can get that, and let me do it again. It's APOLLO dash G A where did I put it? GAIA, and it's got a very good video program that you can get to on your streaming. So now let's ask our guests what their reaction is. They're both local yokels, and he told me that he was visited a prairie on his father's shoulders many years ago.
In fact, my mom wanted me to look through the yearbooks or look through the scrapbooks to try to find the photo from WCIA News of us working at White Heath with you on the Rail to Trail.
So he's working with the university, looking at energy balances, and Nick is a specialist in putting in solar panels, but he's got a whole bunch of other interests, and he's very well read in this sort of field. So between the two of you, let me shut up and have you make some comments about.
Sure.
What?
I'm Nick. Hi, everyone. My first point about this is, it is very shocking to kind of hear some of the numbers. And honestly, I was listening to a WEF program around the time the Paris talks were being completed, where they were interviewing an atmospheric biochemist, and he was, talking about how all of the so much of the warming wasn't being accounted for, because there's the ocean warming, there's all of these different effects that weren't being really judged. And then I actually had the opportunity when Mary Robinson from the former president of Ireland was here giving a talk. I had the opportunity, and she was very important in the climate talks and everything, to ask her, why was this not taken into account? And I think that it does I think scientists didn't think that the politicians could handle it. And there's sort of this dual axis of that, where people don't give each other credit for the real picture, So anyway, that was very interesting. But, what Andy and I were thinking about, and what we really wanted to talk about, is just how much people can do on the local level and can contribute on their own.
Yes, that's what WEFT is about. It's a community station.
And so we that's why we started this solar program, in order to lower the cost for everybody to install solar panels and make energy without burning any carbon.
Get an update on the program?
Yes, exactly. The program has now gotten to close to its second milestone, where people can get additional rebates. And so the price was initially about $3 a watt for a fully installed turnkey solar system. And now, it will drop down almost 10 cents a watt to about $2.90 once we reach our final milestone, which it's seeming likely. So program's going quite well. There's a lot of interest, and we'd love there to be more, because it is something that we have to do right now, and everybody can contribute.
You've been doing things at the independent media to announce this, and did you get a bunch of people?
Yes, we had an excellent presentation last week on Wednesday at the Independent Media Center. I think we had over 20 people come. There's a lot of interest. We're going out to and looking at so many roofs, and it's really great. So I think people are realizing the necessity of doing this, and I think though there are a lot of trees in town, you can always talk. If you have a tree particularly, you can always talk to your neighbor with a sunny roof, and there's a lot of money to be saved, really, because you won't be spending it on energy from carbon anymore. So
Susan Taylor actually had someone come visit, and she has a large tree. But you were saying last time, even if the sun is dabbled, you still have power coming in. And so don't be too reserved. If you've got a couple of big trees, you might be able to do something with solar energy.
And so I had Nick and New Prairie do some assessments for my house, and some of the initial assessments are done with satellite images, and they looked at the satellite images and they said, oh, well, it looks like you have some trees that are growing on the south of your house and to the east, and I have east and west facing roofs, so I would be putting an array in a non-ideal situation already. It would be on an east or a west roof instead of a south roof. And I said, well, that tree to the south, that's an ash tree, so it's dying already. So that's coming out already. And the tree to the east is a river birch that's about 20 years old, and it's 2/3 dead already. So those two limbs are coming off. Those two trunks are coming off already. So as my yard continues to grow, and I think that I still have good solar potential. And then when you guys came out in person, you were able to say, oh yeah, okay, I see those trees there, and you have pretty good solar potential on your east facing roof. And so we're looking at the details of that. And I have to say the other details of that are going, and me personally going and getting financing arranged. So we have the Solar Urbana-Champaign has partnered with the credit union, the U of I credit union, to have a solar specific loan. So I'm applying to that and comparing the rates of that versus doing a home equity line of credit with. So I've been talking with them on home equity equity line of credit. This coming week, we have a talk with a financial group in town who's having us come and give a private talk for Solar Urbana-Champaign to its customers to talk about the financial benefits of investing in solar, investing in your own solar on your own house, and how that can be considered a part of your portfolio of investments. So these systems last 25 plus years of production. So it's a nice long-term investment. I like to think of it almost as a dividend kind of structure, or a
It's kind of an annuity.
it's an annuity, because what you're saving each month. You're going to at least save your going from $100 a month to down to $17 a month on your electric bill in my case. And my electric bill was almost twice that last year. I've been able to save a lot in air conditioning, so that's another big detail, is to do the efficiency side of things. I put a new air conditioner in at the end of last year. But so going from $100 a month down to $17 a month, that's an assured annuity that I'm going to be getting over the next 17 years, and that's just going to go up as electric prices go up.
Part of that is because the cost of getting your power to your house is basically the delivery, the mechanism, the grid that brings it in. So you may have a bill for $100, but 90% of that may be the cost of a grid.
Well, or in this case, $17 of that is still the cost of owning the meter and the cost of the delivery, and then so about half of my bill is the burning of carbon fuel, the generation of the energy, and then the other half is roughly the delivery of that, and then
it's even more for commercial people.
That can be right. So it's an interesting detail when you're looking at your bill. We pay about 10 cents per kilowatt hour here. Sometimes people get confused and they say, "Oh no, one of my bills only shows that I pay 4 cents per kilowatt hour," and that's the part that you get advertisements, postcards in the mail. That's the generation portion. As we have a separated grid, delivery is separate from generation. You have the choice of purchasing your electricity separately from Ameren and from any supplier that you want. Some of those suppliers even offer renewable options. So I always encourage people, when I speak to churches on carbon topics, I always encourage people to go ahead and pay the extra 10% to get the renewable option for your electricity. And that's just investing in wind farms or solar farms throughout the United States. So that's a really excellent option, looking for that on your electric bills. At our church, we did that. We have a 2-year contract that we resubmit every 2 years, and we have the renewable option at our church. And we're going to be putting solar on the roof. So I think that you can do all of these things, both sort of that national investment in renewables and also the local investment in solar on your roof. Those two things, you can really be responsible for your own carbon footprint by putting solar up, by reducing the amount of driving that you're doing, bicycling in the summer more. Some people don't realize at the U of I, you can in fact get off of, there's a month-to-month parking pass. So if you wanted to, in the summer months, get off your parking pass, there are ways to work that out with the parking department, and then you can be a biker for the summer. So you can be a fair weather biker. And I found even on these hot days, as long as I bike slowly, it's almost better to get on my bike and have a breeze than it is to get in my baking hot car. I've had a couple of these hot days where I thought, you know what, and I brought a spare change of clothes there, so I was trying to stay fresh. But sometimes getting in my hot car at the end of the day and sitting in traffic is the last thing I want to do. Whereas I can take Green Street home and take the sidewalk in the spots and get around all the construction. So I really
can you
enjoyed
have
that.
a solar panel on your handlebars? And have a
So-
taillight?
I would love for something like that, but and certainly there are small scale solar panels that I encourage people to research. You can get them anywhere.
Run the radios on
Yeah,
them and things
exactly.
like that.
And they'll just be a matter of like 3 cells that fold out, but they're powerful enough to charge your cell phone or laptop or tablet. And so if you have one of those sitting in your home, you can just leave it by the window side. Instead of plugging into an outlet, plug in those devices and still save energy even in just a small way. So
you could charge the batteries that you use for the front and back lights that, of course, we all use when we're bicycling after dark.
Oh, yeah.
So there you go. You power them up during the day when you don't need them, and then you discharge the batteries.
Certainly, right. I think we're going to start seeing more electrified bikes, and I think that the idea of having built-in lights is an important part from the safety component, and I think there should even be a rule that all bikes just come with free bike lights. I think that would be a great, if somebody wanted to donate money in Champaign County to a fund that gives all bikes sold bike lights, I think that'd be an awesome thing to do a Kickstarter for. But the electrified bike is another aspect that I think really extends mobility for people. So the electric assist bike, if you've never driven one, they're really fun. You feel like Superman when you're riding this bike because they give you a boost and an assist to get up to 20 miles an hour, and they usually can limit at 20, but you just feel so empowered when you're riding into the wind at 20 miles an hour, and you feel like you're going downhill the whole way.
So you have a small electric motor.
A small motor on that, yeah.
And even if you're like intimidated by the cold or something, there now are jackets that have batteries integrated that will warm right up. They're incredible. I mean, they really make you hot. So you probably, if you're on a bicycle, you might use it, but you probably wouldn't even. So, so you know, I've known many people who will bike throughout the winter too in this area.
A lot of the road signs are now solar paneled. So during the day,
certainly, I mean, it's cheaper for now with the price of solar for them to install the post and a little panel on top and a small battery than to run a big, copper line, which copper is to be mined and is very expensive. And so the solar panels are very simple to put in, and yeah, that's very frequent.
So now, Andy, you're working for the university, and they have this commercial campus on South First Street. It's kind of huge. There's a lot of flat roofs. How many of those flat roofs have panels on them already?
So on campus, most of the solar are in a couple of instances. One of the new dorms was built with solar built into the contract of that new dorm, Wasaja Hall. There have been a couple of test instances on roofs. The business instructional facility, Allerton Park has a couple of ground-mounted arrays that they've been able to put in. And then there's the large power purchase agreement on First Street in Windsor that is the large solar farm that the university has. But going forward, looking at putting solar on as many roofs as possible, I think that's a really important thing. There are students that have helped out with some of the urban planning students have helped with some of the engineering students on projects that identify solar rooftops on campus. The other component is also the aesthetics and sometimes the historical nature of some of our buildings. But I think that these can go hand in hand, and I think that we can do nice looking arrays, and we could put arrays on the flat areas of Cranert, or we could put arrays on maybe even the top of the armory. Wouldn't that be cool to see on that big domed roof? I mean, I think if we do it well, and if we get the artistic elements right, I think that we can, if we almost need to have the engineers partner with the artists on campus.
You have to have structural engineers that know that roof will handle that amount of weight. Mm-hmm. It's not an awful lot of weight, but roofs aren't necessarily bolstered to carry extra loads.
Yeah, that is true, but I mean, frequently the roofs are designed for 20 to 30 pounds per square foot of snow in this area, and a solar array will add about 2 to 3 pounds per square foot, so about 10% of that. And generally, if you do the load modeling, they're going to be fine because the solar also kind of spreads out the weight evenly. And so when weight sits on those panels, it actually might spread it more evenly than if it was exactly just a standard flat roof. They'll build up big snow drifts in certain areas, and you have to account for that, where the panels kind of prevent that to a certain degree. So anyway, yeah, there is definitely structural concerns, but I think Andy's right that Cranert roof is definitely begging for some panels to go right there. And he mentioned artists, New Prairie Construction, who we work for, and we're working with this solar program. Our president, Julie Birdwell, is an artist. She trained at the U of I. And we have a couple other artists on our team, so it is true that we try and combine those aspects to make aesthetically. You can put solar skylights in now that will let anywhere between 10% of light through to about 50% of light through.
So the cloud at the end of the street you could put a solar unit in his hat, and he could be lit up during the night.
Well, certainly you could. There's actually a great. When I was learning at my solar classes, one of the greatest slides is there's this camel with these two big freezer boxes on, and then two solar panels hanging off the side of it, and it's using to transport medicine to like small nomadic tribes in, I think Arabic deserts. So it's incredible the uses of them, on camels or elephants or.
So let me say something about the university again. Do you have one of those buildings where people could visit? It's all right to be saying that the university has courses, but the general public doesn't exactly know where all that's. There needs to be a centre. Do you have a centre for this sort of activity? Is it with the weather people, or is it? Where do our citizens find out about it? And
Right.
is it possible for the citizens to take advantage? Because sometimes you can't just walk into university facilities
Right.
and expect service.
The public aspect of it. And I will say that that public aspect is something I'm trying to figure out for our church as well, which is we put the solar panels on the flat roof and now we can't see them. So I want to be able to promote that. So we made a billboard, a sign, and we tied that up to the fence out front and said we have 81 panels on the roof, and we got a panoramic photo from the roof. We want to put up a little kiosk that shows the web-based monitoring in the lobby.
Do you have a stairwell that they can walk up and
I
actually
really
see it?
want to find some. I really want Paca to get me
stairwell.
an old stairwell, an old spiral staircase,
stairway.
and I would love to install a spiral staircase in an observation area. So if anybody has an old spiral staircase hanging around, let me know. I'd love to try to figure that out. If Urbana can put up those enormous egress staircases on Green Street, I feel like that we should be able to put up a spiral staircase and an observation deck. And I would love to put up some green roof tiles up there, some sedum plants or some more intensive or extensive prairie plants on the roof.
You can put vegetation in amongst your.
I would love to
panels?
put some vegetation panels. They just come in little trays, and I would love to be able to do that. The energy engineer in me recognizes that that's not the energy answer necessarily, but I think there's water aspects that help retain. Green roofs help retain water. They maybe keep it a little cooler. So there's some nice aspects to green roofs as well. One thing I was writing down earlier was listening to some of the programs and some of the media that we hear about climate change versus what I think we can do locally. So I think there's this contrast, which is the doom and gloom of climate change versus the impactful items that we can do. And I tend to focus. I think I have a background of that doom and gloom in the back of my head. I don't keep those numbers right there. I don't remember the exact numbers of the exact studies as to how terrible it's going to be. But I think we have a sense of that, and I think our children have a sense of that. My 5-year-old, I don't even talk about this at home very much. They know I go to solar talks once a week, but my 5-year-old made a big poster for the front door that says no smoking, and he drew a picture of a smokestack and a picture of a cigarette butt, and he drew an arrow through them. So in his mind, these kids think that smoking is bad. They look out and they see smokers on the street and they say, why are they hurting the environment? So they have a little crossed and mixed up, but I think that they have the right ideas. What we need now is to think about what we can really do, and we need to involve the kids in those aspects. That's why I love the butterfly, because the kids can bring food for the butterfly, and they can release this and see the magic that is nature, that this transformation, this metamorphosis that happens, and that this butterfly is going to cross borders. This butterfly is going to fly to Canada and live for about a month and lay eggs, drink nectar from flowers, lay eggs. Those will hatch in a month, and they will then fly all the way to Mexico, from Canada to Mexico. So this transnational idea of the environment, I think, is a really important thing to instill in our children.
And Chris Knight, who was Blind Pig bar owner, is flying in a plane, and he encounters the butterflies up there, and sometimes they can go up 3,000, 4,000 feet.
Similar story to that was I was once on a ferry from Rhode Island to Block Island, and we were traveling south in about October, maybe September. And right up, we were on the upper deck of the ferry, and we were traveling on the same day that the monarchs were migrating across, and they were traveling to the islands and then traveling down the east coast on their routes down to Mexico. So that was a really beautiful to fly, to be up and fly amongst the butterflies was one of the great memories I have in my life. But I wanted to mention a couple of the impactful change items. We talked about solar. We talked about solar roofs, solar panels on the ground. We talked about how that can reduce your electric carbon footprint. That can reduce your winter heating carbon footprint if you look at doing electric heating, electric heat pumps, whether that's a ground source heat pump or an air source heat pump. So those are things that New Prairie...
Sure. And one point that I make to people, too, is you actually pay... we talk about distribution fees for electricity. You actually pay $30 a month to get natural gas distributed to your home. And so, if you're in the market to replace your furnace, think about an electric one. And think about, if that's your only gas appliance, think about being able to switch over, get rid of that $30 a month. Because, for one, we're not going to be able to keep burning that, type of fossil fuel forever. So,
well, if you have excess, you can sell it back to the company, too. If you you can
Sure.
reverse the clock.
Yes, they'll reverse your electricity meter, so you'll have excess during the day, and during the summer. And so during those winter months, if you're using electricity to heat, you can take those credits back out and use them so you can really offset almost all of your energy use through a solar array, kind of by doing an all-electric home and those kind of things. Something else that you can do as well is just looking at your investments, seeing where those are as far as like your retirement. If you have a 401k with some ability to move around the money, you can put them in funds that, support renewable energy, that support, good societal things rather than, the oil companies and those kind of things. So,
Yes.
So we mentioned the electricity offsets, the winter heating offsets, and the car is another component of your personal footprint. And as we're starting to see more people, more electric cars be viable options, more plug-in hybrids be viable options, that allows you to plug your car in at night, charge at night when we have low electric rates and low carbon rates of electricity. The price and the carbon footprint really do go hand in hand with supply and demand. So looking at electric cars is another interesting option. Amron's website this week, I noticed, has a flyer for $10,000 off a Nissan Leaf promotion through Amron. So that's something interesting to look into. I called the local dealership. They didn't have any to test drive because I've always wanted to test drive a Nissan Leaf, but they don't seem to have it off the Tesla yet. They don't have a $50,000 off Tesla incentive. So I didn't pull the trigger on buying a Tesla yet. But the other thing is carbon offsets. We mentioned that you can do carbon offsets on your bills, but you can even pay $8 or $15 a month I pay to a group called Sterling Planet that has certified carbon offsets. And for the price of Netflix, I can offset my driving in my car and my airline travel for a monthly fee on my credit card. And I don't want people to just do that and forget about it. I want it to be an and. I want you to do that now. That's something you can do tonight. You can put these things on your credit card, these carbon offsets, and then you can start thinking about what that effect is. And if you don't think it's enough effect, then you go put solar on your roof. Then you bike more. So these things, I think, are additive effects.
Yeah, and I mean, the other thing that I encourage everybody to do, we're doing this grassroots solar program to kind of make it easier for everybody. And I think the grassroots is a good way to really get change done. So, whether or not it's supporting local organizations like the Sierra Club or whoever is supporting the environment, politically, that's where the biggest change will get done, is on the large-scale political level. So, I definitely encourage everybody to support those type of organizations, support community radio that gets this knowledge out there, too, because if you don't hear about this, on your standard radio station. So there's all of those kind of things as well.
So you have companies that are calling in on your Ameren supply. If the Ameren is buying from California, the price of the electricity is provided might be 11 cents a unit or whatever it is. If another company buys electricity at a smaller rate, they can get it for perhaps 5 cents. So there are a bunch of perhaps 6 different companies that keep calling on the phone to get you to buy into the cheaper rate. Then I'm figuring that you guys need a dunghill from which to operate to make the same phone call 6 times a day until you convince people to do this.
I mean, I'm certain that there are going to be solar companies in Illinois doing that type of thing. The big companies in the country, that they call people, throughout the day and say, you can save money on your energy bills. This is why. We'll come out and look at your house and we'll put some solar on. But we're a small company we're local yokels. So, and we've had to hire more people in order to keep up with this big program. We hired a fellow from Western India, and he's really great. Is getting a master's in renewable energy, and we also hired a woman Jill to help out on the roof and install panels. And we have a fellow from Guatemala who helps us, and he is a really great laborer. I mean, and he's just one of the kindest guys you've ever known, although he doesn't want you to think that. But we really encourage hiring minorities, hiring women, and I think that we should all actually try and do that in every aspect of our work because, they just tend to be really good employees.
So I'm asking you about a university place where people can go, but is there a local place with a parking lot where the Unitarian Church doesn't really have a big parking lot?
I forgot to mention so I was talking about the Unitarian Church on when you asked that question, but the university I wanted to mention again. So Morgan Johnson is the sustainability manager for facilities and services on campus, and she is running the first Friday of the month. She's starting a series of tours of the solar farm on campus. She starts out at facilities and services and gives a background of solar and a background of campus solar, and that's a really great resource. If you happen to be on campus and if you happen to want a coffee at the business instructional facility, has that beautiful lobby by Caesar Pelli with a big south-facing glass, which works really well in the summer when you have a big overhang. In the spring and fall, sometimes the sun is a low enough angle that it really heats up that lobby. But it's a beautiful space, and one of the problems with that building, it's a too popular building. That building has higher energy bills than was expected, almost solely because it has 2 or 3 times more people using it per day than the architects expected. So, when you build a beautiful building, the downside is that it gets used a lot. That building has a really nice kiosk that shows the solar production on the roof, and I really encourage you to stop in there and take a cup of coffee and contemplate the solar aspects while you bask in the sunlight of that beautiful space.
You've been talking about the university. That's where you work, of course. I know that the McKinley Foundation recently got an installation. Were you folks by any chance involved with that?
We were not involved,
Okay.
although there was a power purchase sort of company working with a group, Faith in Place, who works with churches to kind of help them get solar in various ways. And so they did a power purchase agreement very similar to Andy's church to put it on the foundation there. We're also New Prairie, and through this program, we're looking at doing solar at the Anita Purvis Center, we have a system that has a nice little kiosk that you can look at. So we really, if you write the Urbana Park District, tell them, yes, this is something that we want, to be able to see and look at, because that would be a great location. People could show up. It kind of connects with nature all there. So we really think that would be a great project.
So it's interesting to note that this discount that you were talking about, I'm not sure you've mentioned it today. You might want to mention it again. It's independent of companies, of installation groups and whatever. So whoever the group is you were talking about with McKinley Foundation and the other churches involved there, they also, and I'll mention, that because I have connections to the church there, I know that they have on their website a time-lapse video of the installation that they had recently. So we may actually drop that into this video,
That would
and
be
if
a
you
really
have
cool
videos,
thing.
or
Yeah.
we will include some of you as well.
Yeah, the McKinley's a great example. They we partnered with them on a lot of our details at the Unitarian Church and worked with Faith in Place, and that those projects came about even sort of before this current community-wide program was really fully up and running this year. But yeah, if you wanted to look into your personal home, that we think that the Urbana-Champaign Solar is a great option with New Prairie, and you have only a few weeks left to get assessments. Nick is working day and night and weekends on doing his final assessments. We want everybody to sign a contract by August 31st to get a part of that group pricing for that program. That being said, New Prairie is going to continue to do solar installations after that point in time, and other groups in town are certainly competing for those as well. So I highly recommend looking into solar for your roof. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the other big carbon elephant in the room is food, and your personal food footprint is a really big component as well. We did a course with our church and with Faith in Place talking about a personal carbon footprint calculator. It was a 4-week course. It was called 4 weeks to lose 5,000 pounds of carbon. And we started with doing your personal footprint, and you look at your electricity rates, how much electricity you use, how much heating you use, how much driving, how much airlines, but then how much food is a big component as well. So switching to less meat, switching to a more vegetable lifestyle, more local foods. And that's not cutting out meat completely, but that's almost savoring meat. That almost gives you the option to buy the more expensive cut of steak from a local vendor at the market and really savor that meat at the end of the week instead of having hamburger every single night. So those are some of the things we like to talk about. We met at the vegetarian Red Herring on campus. And that has even spawned off a separate group called the Conscious Foodies group. And the Conscious Foodies are not necessarily vegan terrorists, but they do encourage local food and less meat, and Meatless Mondays as a good start, or maybe meat-only Fridays. I mean, switching things around and really just trying to play with your diets are a fun way to try to lower your carbon footprint as well.
Do you have horticulturists who know what can grow locally? I go into stores where there are international vegetables, and you need sometimes a tropical climate, but there are certain things that can grow locally. Do we know much about it? Can the farmer with a pineapple, for instance, can that farmer compete with corn and soybeans? Is there an attitudinal thing? Can you convince farmers not to make so much money, but to make sense? Where is the font of that energy?
I did see there was you can do with greenhouses almost anything by using a geothermal, just an air source pump. So if you can have pineapple in this latitude, you have to supplement with lights a little bit.
Urban farming.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways. Yeah, urban farming, vertical farming. My wife and I are doing container farming this year. We really like those kind of pots that have they're just fabric, and they air prune the roots. And actually that's another person who, the solar is really taking a lot of jobs at New Prairie. My wife works, Kaylin, at New Prairie, and she's been doing really good, talking with all the customers and helping them through the sort of solar energy thing. So shout out to her as well. Yeah.
I just got a note from my wife that the kids are listening to, and they got excited when I talked about bikes going 20 miles an hour. And my 5-year-old wants to know if there's a Hot Wheels that goes 20 miles an hour, because that's his cup of tea. So I think we need to start brainstorming with the kids and finding out what they want and start building these items as well.
Well, they have the time to go. If you are going to put in a big installation, and you're in your 90s, you're not going to have the benefit for very long. So it's a younger generation is going to be more able.
Dave, if you're trying to get out of putting a solar array on the roof of Weft and the roof of your building next door, I would argue that you should still do it, and you should leave that for the later generations. I think that we'd love to talk to you about your building and Weft as well. That it's an investment. It's not too much different than investing in a car, but that car is going to pay you back over 25 years, $100 a month, and that's just going to rise as electricity increases. So I'm not letting you off the hook.
It's a heritage.
That's right. Heritage Solar.
We're very near the end. Is there anything that you need to say? We haven't said much about David's theory that there's other things. There's oceans to concerned about. There's the very small amount of carbon dioxide, but it has a tremendous bearing on things.
It does have a big effect
there
on the
are about
oceans.
6 different categories that he gets into that make it positive that you have to do much more than just look at the computer. Simple printout.
You do. I'm just going to hold on to this monarch for a second to remind me, to ground me in reality here for a second. But yes, you can get into the computer models. I took a really great class with Cliff Singer on campus, and that class had a climate simulation game that he's set up, and that climate simulation game pits 6 regions of the world, and the students break up into 6 regions. And some regions wanted it warmer in the game, some regions wanted it cooler. It runs over a 300-year time frame. And then some regions end up sending up rockets full of sulfur into the atmosphere. And it's for the price of a big blockbuster movie, you can put a rocket of sulfur into the upper atmosphere and block some of the sunlight. Now that means we're not going to have blue sky anymore. We'd have sunset red skies after that point in time. But that's going to lower the amount of sunlight and heat warming of the Earth. I don't want those effects. I don't want to geoengineer the Earth. And I don't want rogue countries to geoengineer the Earth. So I think we need to think about it all together. We need to go to these Paris Accords. We need to do our part locally. We need to lead by example with the mayor's climate pledges. We need to lead by example with our universities. Our universities are only 2% of our carbon footprint in the United States, but they are 100% of the graduates that are going out and going to be making these changes. So we need to lead by example. We also need to press our politicians, and we need to continue to make a beautiful life for our children and encourage our children with beautiful animals and beautiful species and experiences that don't involve making sulfur in the upper atmosphere and making our skies red. So I'd like to keep our Earth beautiful.
Well, even our body temperatures that were being spoken about are very narrow. And so a lot of the species that we do have now, if we don't care about them, they will become extinct. And that's a real concern. We need that biodiversity. We need the chemical.
And Dave, truthfully, some species are going to go extinct even with a 1 degree rise. We're going to have to adapt. Species are going to have to adapt. We're going to have to not worry too much about a particular Indiana bat that is going extinct. It's going to happen anyways. There's some of these things that we might just have to face. We shouldn't not do things. We shouldn't not build solar farms and wind farms just for one species. We should think about the whole, but I think we should have a measured and very balanced effect on it.
Yes. Well, thank you, Andy Robinson and Nick Gordon, for coming and second time and bringing a butterfly. And we'll have more to do with you in the long run. It might even be pertinent for WEF to have a visit from your assessment people to look at the roof, even though the WEF has difficulties keeping afloat, and likewise other buildings in the same street.
And we're done. Dave says, because he's got the controls in front of him. Oops, sorry, I cut you off. Say that again.
This is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WAFT Champaign 90.1 on your FM dial.
And Dave on the board.